Um, do you guys know about this story that just has crossed my inbox as you were talking about Stephen Miller, about Paul Weiss, Rifkin, the law firm, and President Trump? Do you know about this? I think it might have
No.
just broken. Okay, so the president went on Truth Social and announced an agreement with the law firm. There's no whiter shoe law firm in the country than Paul Weiss. Totally fascinated by how the president and the administration is remaking all of these liberal institutions, the liberal law firms, the liberal universities, the liberal media, the liberal CEOs, liberal Hollywood. I think I say this about stuff all the time. I wish I could be cloned and write a book about what just this stuff because
Mhm.
it's incredible what he's doing and how his team is so aware of where the weak points are and how to leverage change. So Paul Weiss Rifkin is one of the law firms that the president signed an executive order basically saying they can no longer have security clearances to do these national security cases. And there was a story this morning that one Paul Weiss went to court and said we need to withdraw from a case because our client thinks that our representing him will hurt him. A case against their client's being, I think, investigated or maybe was indicted by the Justice Department, and they said we can't represent this guy because we he thinks that it'll hurt his case because the administration doesn't like us. That's an extraordinary thing for a major law firm to have to acknowledge, but it's testament to how aggressive the president has been. So I don't know the TikTok behind the scenes of how this happened. Mark Caputo and others will have to sort out. But Paul Weiss made an agreement, according to the president, with the White House and agreed to a bunch of stuff that causes the president to do something he rarely has done. He backed off. He has withdrawn the executive order targeting Paul Weiss in exchange for a bunch of stuff. Basically, they're promising to not be liberally biased and against Republicans. But amongst the things they've agreed to, the president says is to dedicate the equivalent of $40 million in pro bono legal services over the course of President Trump's term to support the administration's initiatives, including assisting our nation's veterans, fairness in the justice system, the president's task force to combat anti Semitism, and other mutually agreed projects. Maybe this has happened in American history before, but a law firm committing $40 million dollars to do the bidding of the White House is incredible. And it's again testament to the fear that law firms now have that if they're targeted by the president, it'll hurt their business. Um, I'm still reading through the president's statement. It's quite something. Here's the chairman of Paul Weiss, Brad Karp. Quote, "We are gratified that the president has agreed to withdraw the executive order concerning Paul Weiss. We look forward to an engaged and constructive relationship with the president and his administration." Ryan, what do you think of this?
I mean, this is what people wanted. I mean, this is what Republicans wanted for sure, is the president to sit there and really remake institutions and push it down. I mean, I don't know this law firm particularly in just this one case, but there is no there's been a Democratic administration who has used the power of the government, not just federally, but also locally, to remake institutions and make them in a more left-wing bent and a republic. And if you know what time it is time to use the government to sit there and do the same thing for the right. So I don't know this particular case because it just broke, but I think overall it's a good thing.
Mark.
My first reaction is that this is the law of action and reaction, the Trump thermodynamics, which is something was done to him by the left or the establishment, and he is just repaying it tenfold. The aftershocks of this, the karmic results of this, we're going to have to see. But I remember way back when in 2022, when Trump was being investigated for the classified documents of federal probe, and a number of lawyers did not want to take the job, not just because Donald Trump had a history of not paying his bills, but because they would be ostracized from law firms. Law firms let their partners know, their junior partners know, their employees know, you go to work for Donald Trump and you're dead to this industry. And so this is an example of uh, Donald Trump like some sort of Assyrian out of the Bible, coming in and laying waste to these people with the sword.
Yeah,
I'm not saying
and
it's a great thing, but he is salting the earth and changing metaphors for those of us who are Gen X and had seen Superman 2. He is saying kneel before Zod.
exactly the way I was going to phrase it. Don't know what that means.
Yeah.
And just to be clear, some of the people who did represent the president had to leave their law firms
Well,
and full
a good
and
example, a good example is Chris Kise, who I know, and was the Florida Solicitor General when he was hired on in 2022 to start representing Trump's business. He had to go through protracted negotiations with Trump to not only get the money ahead of time to make sure Trump didn't stiff him, but also to be able to hang his own shingle because the law firm told him, "Look, no way." Carlos Trujillo, the former organization of the former ambassador of the Organization of American States, now has a very powerful legal lobbying firm called Continental. That was essentially born of the Trump era blackballing of Trump lawyers. Now they're in a different position, and these white shoe firms are reaping the whirlwind of the wind they had sown.
yeah, you know, imagine you're the former president of the United States. You're facing indictments that you consider to be completely ludicrous, and you can't hire a lawyer. Now, part of it, as you said, Mark, is because lawyers didn't want to work for someone who hadn't previously paid his bills. But he looks at these law firms and he says, F them. They tried to send me to prison. They wouldn't let me have legal counsel.
Yep.
And so I'm going to get retribution. But just as it's been reported that Columbia University is basically having to give in to all of his demands, Donald Trump works by the dictum. What's mine and mine is mine, and what yours will negotiate over. And he has now said to Paul Weiss what he said to Columbia, which is do it my way or you will suffer huge harm. And in the case of Columbia and Paul Weiss, they've said, yes, sir.
Yeah, and
You
I
know,
mean, if you want to even go expand it onto like a policy thing, if Trump sat there and said tomorrow, no federal contracts for any company that has any DEI policy at all, every company in America will have no longer have a
right.
DEI
Well,
policy
and many
tomorrow.
and many are doing that already. Without that specific
Right, but a DEI is just one example. They could have a
yeah,
million examples,
yeah,
and they would
yeah,
drop them. In the power of federal contracts is the most important power that there is. If the Defense Department said tomorrow we want to buy aspirin made in Indiana, there will be an aspirin company in Indiana. That is
yeah,
literally, it will happen the next day. We
yeah.
allow so much of what we don't like with China or whatever, or companies or institutions the way they are because the federal government has allowed and okayed it. So. I think it is important that the Trump administration is doing something like this from a
Maybe
right perspective.
maybe this is too inside baseball for some of you, but I'm desperate to know the conversations that went on inside Paul Weiss at the senior partner level. And then the conversations, like who initiated this deal? Did Paul Weiss go to the White House and say, we're suing for peace, or did the administration propose it? Either way, again, I don't think there's ever been anything like this in American history. I may be wrong, but I don't think there's ever been anything like this agreement. And it's testament to not just how much they're changing, but how much they are. And I've talked about this all the time. The New York Times had a pretty good story about it this morning. How much they are aggressively going after these liberal institutions and just saying the old rules don't apply. And you may be a private institution, like Columbia University is a private institution, Paul Weiss is, but you're going to play by Donald Trump's rules, even though you're a private institution. And
Mhm.
this agreement, I mean, it's incredible.